Okay.
So we had this idea
Yeah.
to have what we're calling new creation conversations.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, I think it starts from having, first of all, being present, in each other's studio spaces. Here, here you are. Your work is behind you. Here I am. My work is behind me. And these are what I consider to be portals of new creation. I mean that metaphorically and literally. I really believe that when artists create or anybody makes something, that is in response to God's invitation, for us to be makers ourselves, and in some ways that assumes that we acknowledge God as the creator, that we cannot in that sense imitate what God has done, but we are invited to partake in this mysterious journey of co-creation. And so we are artists who are cognizant of that, and we think that, so going into the studio is not just self-expression, and it's not really about us ultimately, but nevertheless we discover ourselves when we lose ourselves in the process.
Yeah. So I find that even though I'm losing myself in the process, I go in with an intention,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What has been focusing your intention these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that word intention is very interesting because when I speak to actors, they, let's say a Shakespearean actor who goes on stage to do Macbeth every day, there can be different intentions every day, even though you're saying the same words and you're performing to an audience that is in the same room, but different people. So your intentions, both in terms of what you present and what you receive, can be different. So actors that I know are very much ones that are attuned to that responsibility, let's say. And since this is not a stage, there's no necessarily anybody watching us paint, but intentions of going into the studio are kind of similar. You have mastered a way of painting. In your case, I don't know how many times you painted on that particular paper, but you obviously chose that paper to work on and have continued to build a series of paintings on the same paper, let's say. And same thing with my Kumohara paper or linen or whatever I use, minerals that I pulverize, gold and silver. There's some things that I've been using for close to 40 years now. So it's something that is embedded in my psyche, my physical somatic knowledge. But the intent of doing a layer, coming into a studio space on that day, this rainy day in Princeton, will perhaps be different than 2 days ago when it was sunny and dry, because my body already knows that the layers of azurite is not going to be the same. It was certainly not dry in the same way. The mixture has to be changed because of the moisture in the air, and we talked a lot about this, Julia, when you were in the studio with me, was to read the air and even preparing oyster shells, you can hear the sound of how you prepare it and how it hits the plate, and that tells you a lot about this particular mixture. And there's really no same thing that can happen, right? Even if you're using the same materials. So you certainly come into a space differently each time. You have different things you're thinking about, or concerned about or worried about. So you have to lay all that aside one by one, peel that off, and then, for me, like, it's a sort of a liturgy that I walk into, that is for me sanctifying, because I have to remove all these vestiges and things that I might be wearing, in terms of even stress or some of the pressures that you experience in life, or trauma or whatever, and release that. But even how you do that might be different each time. So I can only tell you what my intent was today. I was coming into the studio on this kind of beautiful gray day in Princeton, and it is a new year, so I have been thinking a lot about generativity and newness, what I call newness of new creation, and how does that break into this sacred place called the studio. And I'm working on this. I just started this, so I'm about maybe 15 layers right now. I'll probably have to get it to a total saturation level. It's going to require like over 200 layers, so it's going to take me a while. But I'm thinking even in the first layers, I see this distinctiveness of this particular canvas, which some of it was surprising, because I had expected, because I'm so used to doing this over and over. This painting here, the square one, is very saturated level, and so I've been doing this a while, but now I started this one, and it's now the work is pushing me to consider different intentions, right? So you can come in with intentions, but then you have to, the audience, the paint itself will, materials will speak back to you.
Yeah. I call the materials I work with my dinner guests. Like,
that's lovely.
And so the conversation goes in different directions than what you originally intended.
Yeah.
You had an idea for how your dinner party was going to go, and then everybody brings their own thing.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've had a great evening, but it was not at all what you expected. And that's part of being in relationship with the material, right?
That's great.
And having a disciplined studio practice and paying attention while working. Mm-hmm. It's all of those things combined, right?
Yeah, I love that metaphor, Julia, having a dinner guest. Yeah, you don't want the evening to be the same or expected, or you want to be surprised, and you want the guests to feel like there was something new created, and that's a good metaphor. I have to think about that some more, because it is, the feast that I want to be part of, through art. I have been working in this mode of responding to trauma in my work, my own personal, but it started with Columbine High School and 9/11, and so many of my works deal with that, and I want to get to the feast, right? But preparing a feast has a different preparation, than rescue work or trying to fix things, and so that's something I have to think about. Great metaphor.
And it's the idea of, we're doing table theology, right?
Yeah.
So it's also this idea that we might not be in the new creation feast,
Yeah.
but our guests are already here, in that the Azurite, the Malachite, the oyster shell, those are all the guests that are at your table.
Yeah.
That the conversation is already happening, the feasting is already happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
In these acts of creation. As you're discoursing about personal trauma, global trauma, it's all there happening. And changing the direction of the conversation.
Right. And even how you think about the past keeps evolving or changing. And sometimes we tend to get locked into a certain idea of the past or even trauma. And that's one of the hardest things that I had to learn, was that the same type of experience of trauma can come back to you differently, and will reveal itself in a surprising way, and that could come from a particular experience or encounter or conversation or whatever that may be, and it's always you have to stay with it. You have to pay attention to that moment, and that's somewhat mediated in the studio for me, because that's kind of what I learned to do. I had to have my work speak to me as a process of healing and process of finding the future or creating something new. And but sometimes it's a moving target. You kind of have to constantly pay attention. So
yeah. And isn't that so much of the work, paying attention?
Absolutely. Yeah, being present in that. Yeah. And sometimes you come into a studio and you're not painting, and it's not because you're lazy or it's actual work to stay within a space, hold the tension. And there's always, when the work is being done, there's movement and there's speed of it, that actually depends on the materials you're using. But and there's waiting and there's pause, and that time is actually critical for me to stay there, to stay with it, to watch my paintings dry, in that sense.
Yeah, always watching the paint dry. We've spent decades watching paint dry.
That's right. Yeah.
So much to be learned there.
Yeah.
I think that this is a good first segment.
Okay.
And I want to thank those that have been listening and to us converse about this idea of guests and tables of intention.
Yeah.
And we're hoping to do more of these new creation conversations in the future.